Now let me share. Okay, and now let's get down to our talked about that. We were in the process of talking about archetypes, and we watched the video, which was very good. We looked at the diagrams. We went through that. I believe we need to pick up with the systems archetypes as dynamic theories. Okay, so Kim and Lenelin pointed out that we can use systems archetypes as dynamic theories. Okay, so they say to make sense of our experience in this world, we must be able to relate that experience to some coherent explanatory story. Without a working theory, we cannot integrate our differing experiences into a common picture. When we look at systems, we have to understand that there is a shared reality, and that is the common perception of that system by everybody involved in that system. Just like reality is a consensus of what we all perceive, so too the reality of a system is the consensus of all the various elements involved in that system. So each one of these people in a system are going to have their own perspective, their own version of the story. And we've got to try as leaders and as systems experts, system thinkers, we've got to try to account for all the different perspectives or stories. We can do that best by getting to know each of the people in the system. The more intimately connected we are to that system, the better we can explain the different experiences and identify the differences in those experiences. We then can make a common picture. In other words, this is where we start really looking at the system in a holistic manner. And this ties into the discussion from last week. Most of you discussed how the elements in the system you were discussing were interconnected. That is the essence of systems thinking. It's easy to analyze each element, each person in that system. The difficulty then becomes when we step back to look at it holistically using synthesis, how do they all interconnect? Where are the common points between the various elements? Not each element is going to be connected. So we've got to be able to figure out which elements or people or policies or procedures are connected and how they are connected. We have another video to watch. Actually, we already watched that one, so we'll just continue discussing it here. And I do have another video for us today. Systems innovations, the video we watched pointed out that there is a pattern in all the systems when we apply systems thinking. We can identify a pattern. When we graph it out, it becomes apparent. Not at first, because the system is almost like a living being, and we're trying to understand it. So we enter in like a scientist, and we analyze each individual cell or element in this case. And then we have to map out how they relate to each other. And we start looking at the stories that we just talked about, the experiences. Now, remember that the negative internal parts lead to negative externalities. So in a system, if you've got negative components in the interaction between the elements, you're going to have a negative part to that system, the externality, what is being viewed. And if you as a systems thinker are seeing this negativity, odds are other stakeholders are noticing it too. It could be investors, it could be other members in leadership, it could be consultants. Now, the presenters pointed out that there is often a delay between the feedback and a system correction. So when we were young and learning to ride a bicycle and we made a mistake, the feedback was instantaneous because we would get into an accident, we'd fall, our foot would slip off the pedal, something, and we would receive instantaneous feedback. Unfortunately, throughout most of life, feedback is delayed. And when there's a delayed feedback, then the course correction is also going to be delayed because we did not see it in time to correct it. By the time we saw it, that problem had already grown roots like a tree. It grew roots and it got deeper into the system. So now we've got to figure out how to correct it. Where do we start pruning those roots back? Where was the problem? Is it a behavioral issue? Is it a process issue? What is it? And then we got to implement the solution, and we got to allow time for that correction, that system correction, to take its roots, to replace the error that caused that negative feedback. So continuing discussing that video, there are themes, patterns, and storylines, and they're often similar within a system archetype. And that's really one of the keys to identifying which archetype your system is best represented by. Look at the themes. Look at the patterns of connectivity. Look at the storylines. Remember the perceived views of the reality in that system, the stories of each person. Okay, how does it align to that system archetype, or which system archetype aligns best to that? This can lead to a deeper and faster solution process. So course correction does take time. Feedback takes time. But when we apply systems thinking, we can see where that feedback may be coming from before it actually arrives. And then we can start course correcting almost even before we get the feedback because we're projecting that it's going to happen. So we start preparing a solution. And by using systems thinking and systems archetypes, we know which mental model to use. Because everything we're doing is based off of a mental model. And also think about these system archetypes as mental models that pertain to systems. So before we go to the next video, we're going to go through briefly some system archetypes. The titles are there at the top, and then I have the blurb below, and I'm going to read that to you. Limits to growth. This archetype has rapid growth with reinforcing feedback loops to reinforce the growth pattern, followed by downfall, and a continuation of the reinforcing feedback loops without paying attention to the limitations. So this is why some systems, some organizations begin with a huge uptick in their growth. It could be revenue, production, whatever. But when you analyze the system, there are reinforcing feedback loops. And that foretells that there could be a problem because all you need is one wrench to fall into the gears, and that reinforcement loop is going to cause it to spiral downward. So that's why we have to pay attention to the system, and we have to pay attention to what limitations are known to occur with that particular system archetype. The shifting the burden archetype. This has balancing loops or processes that lead to delay. This approach only temporarily solves the problem, a symptomatic solution. So we have an issue in our organization. We engage in systems thinking so we can identify it. We determine that the systems archetype that best explains our system is the shifting the burden archetype. We realize that there are balancing loops in there. Well, balancing loops can be good, but they can also lead to these delays. So if we implement a solution, that solution is going to be delayed now. And it's only a temporary fix because we're dealing only with the symptoms. We need to use systems thinking to identify the foundational problem. What is the root issue? That's what needs to be dealt with. The symptoms, we can treat them all day long, but you're not going to cause any improvement. It's like if you go to the doctor and the doctor only treats the symptoms. Your arm is hurting because you broke it. So the doctor says it's hurting and it's swollen. So they give you an anti-inflammatory to cause reduction in inflammation, and they give you something for pain, but they don't set the bone. You're not going to heal properly. So we've got to take care of the underlying problem. And this is true in organizations and in systems. Happy Halloween. It's coming tomorrow. I hope everybody is ready. You got your tricks and your treats ready to go. That's my advertisement for the holiday. Another systems archetype is called tragedy of the commons. This archetype has at least two negative feedback loops, which leads to unintended consequences. Now, let's break this down here. There's a little bit to unpack. If you have a system and you're saying, what archetype do I use? And you notice, I have two negative feedback loops. You very well probably have a tragedy of the commons occurring. When we try to rectify that problem, we're not going to get anywhere until we actually restructure that system, because those two negative feedback loops are going to cause consequences down the road that we cannot predict. We can't expect what's going to happen. It becomes actual chaos at that moment and not a positive version of chaos. You want to be able to have some ability to predict the consequences or outcomes. So then you've got to go back and restructure that system. You've got to get rid of the two negative feedback loops, maybe bring in a balancing loop in there with a new policy. So when I say I'm bringing in a new balancing feedback loop, I would do that through a policy or a process. And I would do that in a way that would balance the system out for a gradual correction. If you try to correct most problems too abruptly, you actually swing the pendulum to the other side and cause even more problems on the opposite side of the spectrum. The next system archetype is balancing process with delay. Peterson, he says, a person, a group, or an organization acting toward a goal adjust their behavior in response to delayed feedback. You will notice that there is some similarity between balancing processes with delay and shifting the burden. While there are similarities, there are some marked differences, though. Okay, here you're trying to adjust a behavior in that system, a behavior that the elements are engaging in. And you're doing this because there was some feedback that occurred, and you noticed it was delayed. So remember what actually occurred. Now time passes. Now the delayed feedback arises. Now you've got to institute a solution, and that solution is not going to take effect immediately. You've got to let it get its roots into that system. So if you notice a person, a group, or an organization that's acting as though they're moving towards a goal, but their behavior keeps adjusting because these delayed feedback, this unintended consequences is delayed feedback. It's just we don't see it necessarily as a consequence. This would be the process to that consequence. And so here, the process to getting to that final outcome is what's delayed. If you notice that occurring, you got a balancing process with delay, so you're going to have to adjust the structure of that system. Now, let me point out, these systems archetypes are not all negative. You can use the system, the structure that you find in the archetype balancing process with delay to compensate for other problems that you may find in the system you have. Or if the system you have is just running amok, going wild, then the balance process with delay could be the problem. And so you've got to be like a diagnostician going in there and diagnosing what the actual problem is. That takes experience. That also takes being willing to experiment with solutions. You may have to try a couple solutions before you figure out the right way to structure that system. That's okay. You did not fail along the way in any way, shape, or form. When I used to be in the medical field back in the Navy, and I would see a patient that had a certain set of symptoms, there were usually a couple courses of action that could be taken, medication and treatment, therapy, etc. I then would have to try to put the right combination together. It might not work. I might have to go through and try a different part of this therapy or a different combination of that therapy in order for it to work. That's okay because every system is unique. And so you can't approach it as though you've got a ready solution for every system archetype that's out there. No, you have to play around. You have to experiment. You got to explore. That's why it's important to learn how to graph things out because you can actually simulate the effects of causing the structural change in the current system. And then you can play it out and see what the long-term effects are going to be. So now the next system archetype is called special case. Shifting the burden to the intervener occurs when an individual outside the system is brought in to fix the situation, meaning a consultant. Unfortunately, those within the system never learn how to fix the problem themselves. There's nothing wrong with employing consultants to come in and help with restructuring your system. Nothing wrong with that. However, you, the other members of leadership, various team members need to be a part of the process so they can learn how to fix it themselves. Because if you don't, you create a new system archetype that's to be fixed, and that's the special case archetype. So when you go in to fix a system, make sure you include all the relevant people. You may have to assemble a task force, which is basically a team comprised of members from different departments, each one having a stake in this. So when they go to problem solve, make decisions, change the structure of the system, they are working from their perspective. They're giving their input, their feedback, and they also are able to help with the simulations. Now, eroding goals. This is a shifting the burden type of structure in which the short-term solution involves letting a long-term fundamental goal decline. At times, you will have to sacrifice certain goals for your organization, your team, whatever system you're a part of. That is acceptable because not every goal is going to be achievable. It may sound really good. It may look awesome on paper, but when you go to put it into practice, you realize that goal B actually contradicts goal A over the long run. So you need to get rid of one of them. Here, what you would do to restructure is you would remove one of the goals or restate the goal in a way that where it's in harmony with the remainder of the goals for that system. Escalation. This is where two people or organizations each see their welfare depending on a relative advantage over the other. Whenever one side gets ahead, the other is more threatened, leading it to act aggressively to reestablish its advantage, which threatens the first, increasing its aggressiveness. So here you have two competitors. They could be people or they could be two organizations. They're competitors. Let's say they both make widgets, but one is getting ahead. They're gaining the competitive advantage over the other. Well, that causes the other organization to feel a threat. They respond to that threat by becoming more aggressive in their approach, to more aggressively engaging in research and development and production and releasing new widgets onto the market. So there's a threat. There's an opportunity. There's a threat. One is succeeding. The other is declining. The one that's declining claws and fights and struggles to stay ahead or to get back into the lead. This creates a weird situation where now you got these two competitors perpetually trying to one up the other. And they make their goal no longer based on what's good for their organization, but what is the other organization doing and how can we beat them? There's nothing wrong with competitive advantage. There is something wrong when that competition becomes the goal. So maybe in this case, that system needs to reevaluate what its true mission is, what its true vision is, so that they can reestablish their own dominance. Because they can have a form of dominance apart from the other organization while both creating widgets. One might specialize in one type of widget, where the other may specialize in a more unique type that is more nuanced and has a very specific clientele. They both can find success. Another system archetype is success to the successful. This is when two activities compete for a limited supply of resources. And I know I talked about this during the last lecture, but let's talk about this again. Two activities, two systems, two organizations are in an area. They're using the same pile of resources. Now the competition isn't for dominance, but for access to the resources. The one that is successful is the one that ensures they can get the resources. When there's a competition for resources, over time, you will wind up with only one organization left in that place that does that function because there's only so much in the way of resources, and you have to limit the demand. So if the demand of two organizations competing for the same pile of resources is too great for wherever they're located, one may need to relocate or close down or restructure itself so they do a different task where they produce a different product. Fixes that fail. A fix, effective in the short term, may have unforeseen long-term consequences, which may require even more use of the same fix. So you're in an organization, you have a problem, you dump a lot of money into research and development. That fixes the problem in the short run. However, what you've now created is you're kicking the can down the road. So when you get back down and go down a few months, you find yourself in the same predicament again. You dump more money into research and development. You get back on track for a short period of time, only to find yourself in the same situation. If you're in a system where you see you're applying the same fix over and over and over, you need to restructure the system because you need to be able to find a way to solve that problem in a more permanent, long-lasting manner. Growth and underinvestment. Growth approaches a limit which can be eliminated or pushed into the future if the firm or individual invests in additional capacity. Here, instead of necessarily dumping money into the project, you may be dumping money into the ability to produce that product. You may be dumping money into another area. You're overspending what you have from your capital. You're dwindling your resources in the form of capital. The growth hits a certain point where it cannot go further. So you just dump more money into it. You can only do that so many times before you kill the organization. So fixes that fail and growth and underinvestment are very similar, but once again, as we saw before, there are some nuances to each one. So when you're analyzing your system and you're looking at the system archetypes, make sure you pay attention to the details. So now we're going to watch a video on systems mapping. All right, let me key that up real quick. Got to go through a few screens, so just bear with me for a second, please. There it is. No, I don't. Zoom, you're going to be the death of me. There we go. Let me pull up my YouTube and we will have this rolling. I swear I need several monitors. I really need to invest in a system that where I have a couple monitors. That would solve this because every time I move the zoom window, which has to be open, it gets in the way. So let's see. 4950, pause, move zoom again, of course. Systems mapping, let me find the systems mapping. Stop the share. That will help. Here we go. I've got it figured out now, people. Look at that, we're rolling.
As previously touched upon,
Oh, I see. Pause. Thank you. Thank you, video. Come back over here and share, share, share. And here we go. Okay, and we are started.
management is an alternative paradigm to our traditional management approach. If we're going to manage something, we're going to have some representation or model to how that system works. A paradigm is the fundamental conceptual framework or model we use.
I just realized that's the video we watched, which makes me feel extra dumb, but I'm getting used to that feeling because I get it a lot. Why did that video come up wrong? Systems mapping. Let me try a different route to get there. There we go. We share the correct video now.
Systems mapping is a type of modeling that is designed to reveal the underlying interrelationships and structure of an organization. This is beneficial as it helps us to create a shared
Okay, I like the way that they made it very simple. And since we are right now going through a more complex part of the course, it is necessary and it's always my desire to get things presented to you in a variety of ways because I don't want you missing the opportunity to grasp these concepts. What comes after this week, we're going to start applying this a little bit more in a practical way. So don't think that the rest of this course is all this high level complexity stuff, but you need this as a firm foundation because when we go into the practical part, now you're going to have a better understanding of what you're doing and how and why they work. Since we're doing this right now, let me look up one more video that should be in my queue, but it isn't for some unknown reason. This is by Systems Innovation. Again, I happen to really like the way they present things. So let me queue it up and, of course, go to my arch nemesis, Zoom, and make sure I share this with you. This one is going to be specifically about systems archetypes.
System archetypes represent commonly seen patterns of behavior in a system. They have regular
I literally just talked for several minutes without the sound being on. I am so sorry. I really am sorry. Hopefully you're laughing at me right now because I deserve to be laughed at. I'm gonna go back and let's do this again. Wow, that was good. Um, so I hope that now that you've seen these videos, that you've been able to kind of get an understanding that in order to see the whole of the system, you need to understand how to system map, how to engage in systems thinking, and how to apply systems archetypes. We as human beings have this inability to think long term just normally and naturally. Most people have a difficult time with that. We smoke a cigarette and we don't realize that instead of it just being tobacco leaf, that over 300 chemicals are used in the production of the tobacco and the paper. And then most of these chemicals are carcinogenic. I used to smoke 2 packs a day. Now I vape. But I did take 10 years where I didn't inhale anything other than the normally polluted air. Now, when I vape, I say to myself, yes, it may not cause the same cancer as before, but I'm sure that there's some unintended consequence that I'm going to have to face in the future. I'm aware of that. So I don't go into it blind. But many times we're in systems and we engage in activities, we engage in processes, we bring in and implement policies without analyzing what's going to happen in the long run. If you bring a policy into a system, that is more than likely going to either be a balancing feedback loop or a reinforcement feedback loop. That's what policies do. They create these feedback loops typically. You need to be able to graph it out and to think what's going to happen in the future. All right, so as you continue to grow as a systems thinker, a primary tool you're going to be using is systems mapping. And you can practice this now. You can use a television show. You can do it through the whole show. You can do character development. You can do by episode. You can listen to a song and use systems mapping to map it out. You can look at history as we're going to here in a few weeks. Learn how to use some of the graphs by looking at history and break it down using systems thinking. Okay. You can use this in your own life. I've used it in my last romantic relationship that went sour. I used it to figure out where the problems were in myself and in the relationship in general, and where they most likely were with my then partner. You want to know what? The graphs were right. It wasn't me that was right. It was the raw data in the graph. So you need to get used to mapping things, and you can just practice. Doodle on a piece of paper. Start graphing out systems. You're not going to get it right the first couple times. That's the whole point. You're growing and you're learning. Many people list only the elements when they describe a system, just like they said in that video. But there's so much more to a system. And the comments I gave in the feedback while I was grading last week's discussions is if you were talking about the interconnectedness, I was praising you because it's easy to mention the people, policies, procedures. But how do they relate? How do they connect? Start looking at that deeper underlying interconnection, that framework, that webbing that holds that system together. And I can expand that out, I guess. There we go. So coordinated action requires a shared understanding. If you're on a team and you're supposed to be working towards streamlining a process, streamlining something with it inside the team or organization, you need people that can help you in the process of identifying the elements and interconnectedness inside that system. Systems mapping can help lead to this shared vision, this shared understanding. It can help you reach a consensus. Not every consensus is the way to go. Consensus sometimes causes more problems than it solves. But in this case, you want more people being able to see the same thing. Now, if we all sat down to graph out a system, I guarantee you we're going to see a lot of similarities. We're also going to see some different things. Those are the important things. The things that you see that I don't, those are something I need to value. So just because someone else sees different elements or different interconnected webbing in the system, don't turn them away. Listen to what they are saying because you need that information. With systems mapping, you can also better describe the system's current state. Is it being successful? Is it failing? Is it stagnant? And you can also help locate opportunities for growth, for development, new products, new services, or ways to bring in policies or procedures to help correct problems in the system. So how to map a system. You identify the various elements. We saw that in the video. You identify how they interconnect, this interconnectedness, and you do this through causal loops. What does this variable make this variable do? When this one grows, does this one shrink or does this one grow? What's the relationship? Is this person feeding into this individual ideas and perspectives? Is this person now growing because they've increased their ability to understand something? Or are they retracting because they feel that they're being pointed out as not being intelligent enough? It requires humility to engage in systems thinking. I don't know everything, and I have 5 degrees, including a PhD. I literally don't know everything. I know a whole lot about a tiny slice of the pie, but even in there, the part that I'm the subject matter expert on is so minute that literally I can be the only person on the planet specializing in there. I may never run into another person who's even interested in that. So what do? I take what I know, I work with other people, I take what they know, and we add it all together and we figure things out. So there's a cause and effect causal map that happens, okay? Like they showed in the video, like we're describing now. And this focuses on the cause, the effect, the circumstance, the situation, the decision, the outcome. There's 2 types of causal relationships, positive and negative. Remember that. So when this element gives into the other element, to the interconnectedness, and they're giving, does this grow? Does this shrink? That tells you. As this grows, does this grow? Or when this element shrinks, does this element shrink? That will tell you if it's positive or negative. The 2 feedback loops. You have a reinforcing feedback loop, and this produces a positive outcome typically. Now, I will reword that a little here. That positive outcome doesn't mean that it's always, yes, a good thing, or yes, more money, or yes, more of something. What this is meaning is that there's a relationship. There's a positive relationship between the change or alteration of one element or variable and the change in the other. This one reinforces this one. So as this grows, this grows. As this shrinks, this shrinks. That's that reinforcement. Now, even minor changes can cause big effects over time because this reinforcement loop creates a snowball effect and it begins to accelerate. So with each cycle of that feedback loop, it's going to become more negative, more positive, quickly. Boom, boom, boom. It's going to continue growing or it's continue shrinking. So if it's a good thing that's happening, and remember, good could be that the second element increases or decreases, because decreasing can be a positive, depends what you're dealing with. Remember, you might need to slow it down at some point. You might have to pull the brake on that, because if it gets too small or too big, now you've got another problem on your hands. And even minor changes grow over time. We've all heard it said that a butterfly flapping its wings in South America can cause a hurricane to hit Japan. Now, that's a little absurd because a butterfly literally does not cause that hurricane. But what that is trying to say is the smallest alterations in a system, the smallest changes over time add up exponentially. That's the very foundation of chaos theory, which academically is known as nonlinear dynamical systems theory. Oh, another Halloween image there. I have to put them in. I love Halloween, and I'm just sad that it's only one day a year. We should have it at least, I don't know, 12 or 13 days a year. I don't know. But anyway, I have to throw the monsters in the presentation. All right, back to feedback loops. A balancing feedback loop seeks stability. Now, stability, we always seem to think that stability is normally a good thing. It can be. Too much stability causes stasis. In other words, no momentum. So you've got to be careful with balancing feedback loops. Whereas reinforcement loops will snowball over time, and you got to be careful of that. A balancing feedback loop can lead to complete inactivity, total stasis. So apply them sparingly in the right amount for the right time, and then maybe you have to change the system, may have to tweak it a little. That's okay. Now, there's a political component here, since you or others might feel that you need to change or reduce a specific goal. This is the ego coming into play. On a team, a person's ego can make them feel that they must win or they must be in control. They must be in charge. You have to be careful about that. When you're dealing with creating this balance, sometimes it goes against one of the team members' ego, their own agenda. They may have their own vision, their own mission, and it doesn't align with that of the system. Just as organizations have mission and vision statements, I'm of the belief a team needs to have a mission and vision statement. Organizations, they think years into the future. On a team, because things happen much more quickly, you need to think in terms of months. So short term would be 1 month. Midterm may be 1 quarter. And long term might be a year. Where at the organizational strategic level, 3 years might be short term, midterm might be 5 years, and long term could be 7 or 10. So it really goes with what level of organization you're dealing with. Now, remember that instant feedback. Remember the instant feedback we discussed about when we were learning to ride a bicycle? I was on a bicycle when I was 7 years old. I was coming down a hill. We lived up in northern Maine. I hit the brakes. There was sand. The conditions were just perfect. Next thing I know, I am at home with a flashlight in my eye and someone who used to work in a doctor's office checking me out and then taking me to the hospital. I received instantaneous feedback on the bicycle. So, with balancing loops, we don't always get that. With reinforcement loops, we don't always get that. So, try to project based on as many factors as you can account for right now. What is the range of potential outcomes that could occur? Then you prepare for the worst, but you aim for and strive for the best. We can't prepare for every possible outcome because we can't account for every variable impacting us right now. But we can get it down to a basic range, and that's usually good enough. Actions lead to consequences, and the delay between the action and the consequence may lead us to overshoot the goal. It could also be a positive attribute if we know that the delay is present. So just figure there's going to be a delay between you implementing an action, a new policy, a new strategy within a system, and the outcome. That delay really depends on what situation you're dealing with. Some things change quicker than others. Case in point, an analogy. As you know, I was in the Navy and the Army. In the Navy, if the ship is small, we call it a small buoy. That ship could turn around in the ocean fairly quick. I was on an aircraft carrier. Those are huge. 5,000 people on one of those things, okay? It took forever for us to turn the ship around. The same thing is true in systems. When you go to create change, smaller systems may change their course much quicker because there are less factors at play. Bigger the system, slower the change typically seems to be. A balancing loop produces a balanced outcome, okay? That might be what we're shooting for. Now, if we just take that statement out of context, it's like, duh, of course we want balance. So let's use balancing loops only. No, because sometimes too much balance causes, remember, stasis, inactivity. So you've got to use them knowing what they're going to cause. Now, a negative feedback loop will control the process. If it's the process is getting out of hand, you put in a negative feedback loop. It could be a reinforcement or a balancing loop, just as long as it's negative in its outcome. It will slow that down. Causal loop diagrams can become stock and flow diagrams. You can also, if you're starting with a stock and flow diagram, find the feedback loops and you can actually identify causal loops inside of there. So the two really work in concert together. If you're doing a feedback loop, a stock and flow diagram, you want to do a causal loop diagram real soon. And if you're doing causal loop diagrams, you're going to want to do a stock and flow diagram pretty soon because you need as much information as possible. Remember, systems thinking starts with the elements. We're looking through the microscope. Then we step back and we look at the whole system holistically using synthesis. So stock and flow diagrams. Stock accumulates what the system produces. Of course, you saw with the tank of water, you have the water flowing in into the reservoir, and then you have the spout coming out. That's basically what a stock and flow diagram is. Now, they do get more complex because you've got to account for multiple inflows. Could be financial resources, it could be raw materials, it could be labor hours. Really anything that's coming into the system. The stock is where that system is producing its products, where it's housing its ability to produce, its warehouse, its production lines. And then the outflow, that's where it goes now either to the next stage of production, if it's part of a chain, or to the consumers. Flows change the level of stock in the system. So if I'm producing 100 widgets an hour and I'm selling only 20 widgets an hour, I begin building up stock. So my warehouse is getting full. I need to either slow production down or ramp up more sales. So remember, you're looking at resources, man hours, labor hours, and raw materials as they flow in. The system engages in its works and products and or services flow out. This right here is a very simple stock and flow diagram, basically showing the inputs, the process, and the output. If I wanted to make this more complex, there are a series of symbols that I could use, such as a little faucet for when I'm bringing something in, and a reservoir looking thing, a square. Get used to just using squares for the actual stock because you're going to use that whether you're using a causal loop diagram or a stock and flow diagram. And then your variables, you can make them something other than a rectangle. So you got your rectangle, then you got triangles, whatever it is, whatever really works for you. Okay, so here we've got raw materials coming in, metal, wires, circuits, energy, labor, investments, etc. The system is at work. This is the stock part. You got the projects, the teams, the tasks, production lines, fabrication, the warehouses. And what's on the outside going out? You got the products or services going out, computers, watches, videos, education, services, etc. This may seem basic, but in leadership, you need to account for all of these different factors, all of these different processes in the current of going from a raw resource to a finished product. Now, we're at the end of this particular lecture this week. As I said, this week is a bit more looking at the nuts and bolts of systems thinking. We are not going to spend the rest of our time solely on the nuts and bolts. We will return to it from time to time. The textbook you're using by Barry Oshry is a wonderful book. Okay, it's easy to read. Barry Oshry presents systems thinking in a very useful and practical way. I appreciate the way he presents it because you can start with something that seems overwhelmingly complicated, and then it's really not. Parts of it are, but when you're learning from Barry Oshry's book on how to apply systems thinking, you're going to learn the practical applications. Keep in mind these different graphs we've talked about, the different levels of intricacy. All right. Now, I would like to open the floor up because I know that this is a complex topic. I want to open the floor up for any questions or discussion.
I got nothing.
Okay, no problem. I would like to encourage you to go to YouTube. In the search bar, type in systems thinking, systems mapping, causal loop diagrams, stock and flow diagrams. You're going to find a lot of resources out there. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's a lot of good information out there. And people present it in slightly different ways. Maybe there's somebody that presents it in a way that will help it make more sense to you. I highly encourage my students to avail themselves to the plethora, the multitude of resources out there, especially with something as complex as this. And bear in mind, systems thinking is systems theory being applied. Systems theory falls under complexity theory. Complexity theory deals with chaos theory. So really, this is a complex subject. But once you grasp its basic principles, you can actually employ it on a daily basis. It has revolutionized how I view the world around me. And I honestly hope that it does the same for you. If there's no questions, I'm going to let you go. I would like to remind you to make sure you do your assignments and anything in the module discussions, anything that's coming up, and read the material. Please read the material. It's really, really going to help. Go on YouTube, research us out further, have some fun with it, and then you have a great day. Okay, everyone?
You too.
Thank you.